Pizza Makers. I'm Bev Collins.
And I'm Deb Roney.
In the next few minutes, Deb and I are going to be showing you the techniques, the equipment, the recipes, and the ingredients to do a wonderful New York style pizza in your own kitchen. And welcome to our country kitchen that we're working in today. Deb, when I say New York style pizza, what does that mean to you?
Is New York style more crisp and maybe a chewy inside?
Exactly so. It's more of a thin crust pizza, not a thick one like a Chicago style pizza. It's not a cracker crust. It's probably the pizza that most Americans are familiar with. Some people probably wonder, do you need a lot of equipment to make pizza at home? The good news is you probably have most of the equipment already. If you have a bowl and a wood spoon, you can make the dough. Now you might want to mix it up with a whisk to get it started, or even a dough whisk, but that's all you need.
When was the first time you had pizza, Bev?
I was 16.
Not till then.
Until 16, but it was love at first bite. And after that, I bought some pizza mixes at the store, but they really didn't make good pizza. There weren't any books available then, so I kept trying to figure out how to make a better pizza. And eventually I did, and I taught pizza in some cooking schools, and I had the good fortune of working for a major pizza company where I was able to visit suppliers of all kinds, cheesemakers, meat, spices, millers, and I learned so much about making pizza that I was able to transfer to my own home kitchen.
Sounds wonderful.
It takes a lot of work to make a dough by hand, so some people might be interested in a machine to help them along. KitchenAid is the most familiar machine, although there's Bosch, Electrolux, and other good heavy-duty mixers. This one here is a small mixer. It's a tilt-back arm, very nice to use. One of the less expensive mixers.
This is the one I have at home.
A nice one, isn't it? A little larger mixer that can make up more dough is the stand mixer that has a bowl that raises and lowers. In both the one we just looked at and this one, you have a flat beater, which I like to use for mixing up the dough initially, and a C-hook.
A dough hook.
Exactly so. If you already have this, you have a KitchenAid that will work fine for you.
This is all we need to mix the dough.
Exactly so. Now, some people wonder, should I buy a top-of-the-line KitchenAid model, one that has a power knead hook with it? I still like to use the flat beater first and then finish with this spiral dough hook, which does knead the dough very, very well. But if you have the one we just looked at, you don't need this. Some people find a very quick and useful piece of equipment for making dough is a food processor. In 2 or 3 minutes, you can go from start to finish and make your dough in the food processor. It does put a little heat into the dough, so you have to be sure everything is well chilled. More and more people are wanting to use some whole wheat in their dough, which isn't exactly a New York style pizza dough, but they're looking for the benefits that you get from more fiber. A Vitamix machine can be used to grind your wheat berries, turn into flour, and then make your dough in here also. But just like the food processor we looked at, you have to keep the temperature of your ingredients very low.
This is not a normal blender.
It is not, and I'm glad you asked that because a blender would not work to make the dough.
Okay.
This is a grain mill, another option that you could grind your whole wheat and use one of the other traditional mixers that we've just shown. Is there anything I've left out, Deb?
I sometimes will make a pizza dough in the bread machine.
And that's what we have right here. What a time saver.
It is.
Now, you're a busy working mom.
I am, but does it make the same dough like you're talking about with the KitchenAid?
Not quite. If you follow your instructions for making bread, you'll find it makes a less firm dough. but you might like that well enough that you don't need to add any more flour, or you can just take the dough out and knead it a little more flour in by hand.
Okay,
And there you have it. There's our choices of equipment.
great.
There's one piece of equipment that makes all the difference in making a New York style pizza in your home oven, and that's a pizza stone. Again, though, you don't have to buy something expensive, especially when you're first getting started. For example, you can go to the home store and get these red quarry tiles, and you can just line your whole oven shelf with these and bake your pizza on that. Of course, you do get a little bit of flour and crumbs that fall
Sure.
down between them. So here's a very good answer right here, and this is a pizza stone, but it also comes in a square or oblong size. Now, if you look at the side here, Deb, you'll notice that this is a 1/2 inch at the edge, and it's thicker even here. So this heat really helps your pizza crisp up, brown, and rise.
So you need to preheat your oven with these stones in.
Exactly so. Now, some people may already have one of these stones on hand. It's about a 1/4 inch or
It's
3/8
thinner.
inch. This won't do the job. But if you go get a few of these tiles and lay this right on it, you've made a thicker pizza stone.
Okay,
Let me hand you these here so I can get down to this bottom one. This is the Fiberman stone, and it's 3/4 inch thick. And I'm really fond of using this for the pizza. This is the same material that's used in a pizza deck oven.
now can you clean this in your dishwasher?
This you wouldn't clean in a dishwasher, but you can use it, you can clean it in a self-cleaning oven.
Oh, okay.
Now this one here, I would just put through the self-cleaning cycle. But this one here will tend to absorb some odors. So with this one, you need to clean your oven first and then put this through the self-cleaning cycle.
Okay. Is that all I need in my oven then?
That's all you need. Now, if you want a little more top heat, you could put some of those red quarry tiles, or you could put a pizza stone on your top shelf and you've made your own pizza oven.
Created a restaurant-style pizza oven.
Exactly so. Now, what are we going to use to put the pizza on in the first place? Well, you really don't need anything other than a one-sided cookie sheet, because you can get the pizza, you can put the pizza on one of these screens and you can slide it into the oven just like this. But you don't even need a pizza screen. You can use baking parchment. However, you have to keep your oven temperature to 450 degrees or lower, because the paper will tend to burn
It burns.
if you get above 450 degrees.
And what are these? Pizza screens?
So these are pizza screens. It gives you a target for your pizza dough. And you'll notice that there is a concave side and there's a convex side. So you want the curved side down on these.
Okay.
These come in an amazing variety of sizes.
Where can I pick one of these up?
These are a little harder to find, but if you go to a restaurant supply store, or many kitchen shops will have them now, or they're available online.
Okay.
And that's also true with the pizza stones that we just looked at.
Or your
There's-
local dumpster?
Oh, no, this is just a well-seasoned one, Deb.
Oh, okay.
Don't be surprised when your stone and your pizza screens take on this dark patina here. It means that it's getting seasoned, your dough isn't going to stick to it, and it's actually
Okay.
better.
Great.
When you get these screens new, you want to spray them really well with that nonstick type spray.
You need to throw that in the oven with the spray on before you put the dough
Yes,
on?
just to make sure they're good and clean, I like to bake them off, and then before I do the pizza, spray them really well.
Okay.
And once in a while, despite your best efforts, it will tend to stick a little bit, but you can burn off the residue, or you can soak it in some water and then respray again.
Okay.
So that's the option that I was always familiar with, but now there are many more options, like these pizza squares or pizza discs that are metal with holes in. Many times you can find these at your department stores or Walmart type stores. They make a little darker crust, and some people like that better. So I think it's just a
Okay.
matter of personal preference. But again, these come in several different sizes and styles, and even in the shiny silver, which will tend to give you a lighter or whiter crust. So if
Okay.
you like the darker crust, you go with the darker. So we talked about you can get your pizzas in and out of the oven using a cookie sheet that has no side. But a tool that's very handy is a peel. Now there's wood peels, like this one, that is designed specifically for pizza. And there's a squared off peel. If you're a bread maker, that also works very well for bread. And you can even get a peel in smaller sizes to handle, let's say you were making several small pizzas at one time on your stone.
Okay.
These pans here are ideal for your deep dish pizzas.
Oh,
They're
okay.
thick, they're heavy, they're non-stick, or in this case you have an earthenware one. This is a nice size for a Sicilian crust. So there's some of our options for equipment. I should mention also that there is a metal pizza peel that is another choice.
Okay. All kinds of choices.
Yes.
Great.
The secret ingredient that most people don't know about to make the New York style pizza is the flour. Have you ever noticed how most recipes for pizza dough look pretty much alike? They have water, yeast,
Flour.
flour, salt, sugar, oil.
You can't just use any kind of flour.
That's the problem.
Okay.
One person wrote me and said, I was really disappointed when I looked at your recipe. It looked like all the other recipes I'd seen. So here's where technique and the right flour comes in.
Okay.
Now there's one flour called 00 flour, and I've been asked, should I get some imported Italian flour that's 00, or there's an American version of it here?
And what is 00, Bev?
That's a very fine flour. You notice it says farina.
Okay.
The farina is the flour that's taken right from the center of the wheat berry. It's very, very fine. Take a feel of that. You'll see
This
it
is
feels.
the 00.
Yes,
It's very soft,
yes, almost like a cake flour.
cakey, compact.
Leave this to the Neapolitan pizza makers, those who have a wood-fired oven and can reach temperatures of 700 to 1,000 degrees.
Okay.
Makes a very, very thin crust pizza. It gets done in only 90 seconds or a couple minutes.
When you're really hungry. You don't have to wait.
That's right. You wouldn't, except to fire up that oven to
Okay,
1,000
yeah.
degrees. Now this flour is the one most of us are very familiar with from the
Unbleached,
grocery store.
all-purpose.
The all-purpose flour. It's good for everything and good for nothing when it comes to making pizza. Take a feel of this flour.
This is the unbleached.
It feels not quite as cakey, you'll notice, as the farina flour
Right.
that we just got done with. Most people probably will pick this flour, the bread flour, when they go to make pizza, because that's what the grocery store has. The bread flours are typically made from Kansas-type winter wheat. It's not as strong a wheat as the one that we're looking for. But again, now you'll see a little difference when we go to this one. It's less cakey all the time.
Okay.
The one that we are looking for is a high protein or a high gluten flour, such as this Sir Lancelot flour.
And that makes all the difference.
That makes all the difference in the world.
Can I get that at the grocery store?
There are a very, very few grocery stores that you might find it at, but you have a 99.9% chance you're not going to find it at your grocery store. But you can buy it online, or you can go to a food distributor who has a cash and carry store. Now, you have one
Okay.
close to you, don't you?
I think we have a Martin Brothers.
Yes.
Would they have it?
They certainly would.
Okay.
Now, they might not have it on their shelves. When I visit my son in Michigan, I go to Gordon Food Service retail store, and they actually have it on their shelves here in this
In the
big
bigger bag, sure.
Mhm. But a lot of the stores, you'll have to ask them to bring it from their warehouse, and it may take you a day to special order it.
Okay.
Now, this flour is grown in the northern climates, like the northern half of Minnesota, the Dakotas, Montana, especially in Canada. Now, the Canadians are lucky here because their bread flour is going to be more like the spring wheat flour that we're wanting from the northern states in the United States. Take a feel of this flour. You notice it's almost granular in character?
It is more granular.
More of the berry, wheat berry, is taken when you grind this flour. So you actually get some flour from the first clear part of the wheat berry. You'll notice that this is a little darker flour, and that's what really gives it more elasticity and crispness and the crunchy, chewy part that you like.
Good.
And in the DVD, which will have all the recipes, all the information that we're talking about here, we'll also have sources where you can get these online or suggestions where to look. You might even look at your local pizzeria. Sometimes the local pizzeria will say to you, everything is for sale here. Now there's some other flours that might be of interest to you. For example, those people who want to do whole wheat in their crust might purchase something like this, and you'll notice now that this is a much browner flour.
This is the whole wheat.
It's much more granular. And a product that some people like to do their pizzas with is the white whole wheat. And you'll notice that if you look at this, it is a much whiter and more of the texture characteristics that you would get from a white flour.
Okay.
And it's really the white flour that we're looking at for making the New York style pizzeria pizza.
Sounds good.
There's just a couple other ones here that people sometimes are curious about. The durum flour is a high protein or high gluten flour, but that's usually used for pasta. But you can also use some of that for variety in your pizza. And here's some semolina. When I worked for the pizza company, once in a while they would be doing a run of our flour right after they did the semolina, and it would come out with a lot of this yellow semolina in, and it really was rather tasty, but it wasn't our pizza. I might mention too that King Arthur Baking Catalog online has a lot of the ingredients and equipment that you'd be looking for, and that's where our Sir Lancelot flour came from.
Okay.
Deb, we're to the exciting part now, making the dough.
One step closer to that pizzeria style pizza.
Yes, and our viewers can follow along with the formula that we're going to use, which we call a lean formula, because there's not much else besides water and flour in it, just a little bit of salt, yeast, sugar, and oil. So let's talk about the individual ingredients that are going to go into this pizza dough, starting with the water. Usually your tap water is going to do just fine.
What if I live in the country?
A well water is usually good too. However, our well water has a very strong sulfur odor to it. So we have an RO system on ours, and I use that. Or if you have a filter on your water, that will work too. If you have highly chlorinated water, you might want to purchase some spring water from the grocery store to make your dough.
Okay.
But for most people, the tap water is going to work just fine.
And what temperature do I need the tap water?
I like to start with some that's about 110 degrees, plus or minus a few degrees, because that's good for the yeast. Now there's two kinds of yeast that you'll find in the grocery store. One is the active dry yeast, which definitely has to be dissolved in warm water at the right temperature. The other is the instant yeast, like this SAF. It will still dissolve if you put it in the flour and if you use cool water, but here's why I like to dissolve it in the warm water. When the yeast is dehydrated, it develops holes in the cell wall. When you use the warm water to dissolve it, those holes fill back up. So you don't leak the contents of the cell into your dough.
Sounds like a lot of chemistry.
It certainly is. But people who are not that much into perfect results don't need to worry about it quite as much as someone who's on a timetable and working in a bakery type atmosphere. I do like the instant yeast though, because it is so easy and so foolproof to use.
I see you've got a pretty big batch. Does it freeze, or how do you save that much?
That's what I do.
Okay.
I put it into the freezer. There's some debate about whether it should be refrigerated or frozen, but I'm still using some yeast a year later.
Oh,
That
okay.
when I put it into the freezer, whereas it'll last about 4 months in the refrigerator. Anytime you get some new yeast, you want to prove that the yeast is alive. So we proof the yeast. And I've already done that here. In fact, you did that for me, Deb. You heated some water here
And
to
how can you tell?
110 degrees. See that foaming and bubbling?
Okay.
That tells you that the yeast is alive. Now, you only need to do that once when you're just starting with a new package of yeast. After
Okay.
that, you know it's fine, and we want to get this used pretty quickly.
Okay. So that's got our water that was 110, our yeast, and was there anything else in there?
We added a teaspoon of sugar to that too,
Okay.
from the dough formula.
And that's our base.
That's our base, and now we can add the salt to it, which I like to add some sea salt to it because that has a very good flavor.
Sea salt is different from the table salt because of the flavor.
The table salt has all the minerals mined out of it. So the sea salt has the minerals left in, and it has a very nice flavor to it. But you can use just the regular table salt also.
Okay.
Then we'll add some oil to this. I've got olive oil that I'm using. You don't have to buy an expensive olive oil. It
Can
can
I
be just
use-
an inexpensive one.
Any kind of oil or just olive oil?
You could use corn oil, canola oil. You could melt some solid shortening and use that. Now we have everything here but the flour and some additional water. Here I'm going to add some cold water. I want to bring the temperature down here. Now, isn't that just opposite of what you would expect if you were making bread, where you're trying to keep everything warm? Here we're trying to keep things cool, because one of the secrets of making New York style pizza is to keep the dough slow and low temperature, and let it rise very slowly.
Very different from bread.
So you notice we use very little yeast in it too. Well, I used a half teaspoon of yeast in this. Sometimes if I want the dough to keep longer, I'll use only a quarter teaspoon of yeast per dough ball. Today we're going to give a rough measurement to the flour, but usually I just reach in and start scooping it out because we're going for a certain texture of the dough. Flour is going to vary some from season to season and from brand to brand.
It's always a good idea to check and not just measure the same amount then.
And it's also hygroscopic, so the flour will take on moisture if it's humid or give it up when it's dry. We're working with roughly a 52% hydration dough here.
It looks a little like pancake batter right now.
It does, and at this stage you can beat it and get it really well mixed up. In fact, we're going to switch from the wooden spoon here to a dough whisk, which makes this easy to mix up.
Can I use a regular whisk if I don't have a dough whisk?
You sure can, although you might want to stop before it gets too stuck to all those little beaters on your whisk.
How much flour have you added so far?
I put 2 cups in here, and you'll notice this is starting to thicken up pretty nicely.
Okay. Getting a little elastic in it.
I'd usually choose a quieter bowl here, but I'd like our viewers to see what's going on.
The good glass bowl.
Now we're going to put a little flour out here, dump our dough out. See, we already have a fairly stiff dough here. Now we'll get plenty of flour on the dough because it's going to take quite a bit more here. Right now the gluten hasn't been developed, and this is very stiff. Notice how it breaks apart. When we get done kneading this dough, it's going to be very elastic. Elastic like in some nice pajamas.
That haven't been worn out.
That's right. That we don't want to do. The motion that I use for kneading is to just give the dough a quarter of a turn, roll it toward me, press it down with the heel of my hand, not so hard that you get dough stuck to your hand, but just so it pushes into the dough.
I can see it becoming more elastic as you do that, Bev.
About 8 to 10 minutes of this will develop this dough so it's pretty nice and elastic.
And you really haven't added all that much more flour from when it was in the bowl.
No, and this high gluten flour makes a beautiful pizza crust. And as we talked about earlier with flours, this is one of the big secrets of making a New York style pizza crust. Would you like to give your hand a try at this?
Sure.
Be sure you get the dough completely floured well so it doesn't stick to your hands, and flour your hands. And I notice you're kneading with your fingers, and that's fine. I knead with the palm of my hand.
Okay.
Either way does the job just fine. We're going to let Deb work on this for about 10 minutes, and we'll be back to show you how to do it in a mixer. Deb, this dough looks excellent.
Thank you. I worked hard.
You did. I think you worked about 12 minutes on this, which was just right. But notice how stretchy this is. Remember when we first started, the pieces just broke,
Yes.
and now it's stretching nicely.
Starting
And
to
that's
look
what we
like
need.
pizza dough.
Exactly so. But now we want to know about that right consistency for the dough, since that's a floating number, that if your flour is a little on the damp side, your water temperature is not the same every time, then the amount of flour it takes to get this consistency can be a little bit different. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to knead this up. We're going to close it up. And this step here is important because if you don't get that totally closed up, it'll leave a hole. And when you make the pizza, you'll have a hole in the center of your pizza.
Oh, okay.
So we've shaped that up into a dough ball, and we're going to just set it here on the countertop and watch it
looks like it just relaxed.
Yes, this is our dough watch. It should relax just a little bit, not too much. Much like if you tensed your muscles and then you relaxed them. You didn't move your arms, but you just relaxed slightly. That's what the dough should do in about a minute's time.
Okay.
So this is absolutely perfect.
Good.
We're ready to store this away now in the refrigerator, but more about that later.
Okay.
The nice thing about this formula is it's so adjustable, Deb. I'm using a cup of water here, but if I wanted a thinner crust than we're getting, I could go with 3/4 of a cup of water, and then I'd just reduce the salt, sugar, and oil to 3/4 of a teaspoon.
Okay.
I, however, like the dough a little bit thicker than I'm actually making today, so I'll use a 1.25 cups of water and a 1.25 teaspoons of salt, sugar, and oil.
Okay.
This is how this might look if we were doing it from start to finish in our dough mixer here. We're adding the water that we've checked to be the right temperature. We add our 1/2 teaspoon of yeast, turn on our mixer, get the yeast dissolved. Along with a teaspoon of sugar. And by the way, you could use honey if you wanted to.
Oh, okay.
If you were using whole wheat, you'd especially want to use honey and a lot more of it than in the recipe. The sugar not only adds a little flavor, it also adds browning. So if you're not getting as much browning as you want or as much sweetness, you can just increase the sugar. So our yeast has dissolved now. Our sugar's dissolved. We're adding the teaspoon of sea salt. This is a coarse crystal, as you can hear the sound of the crystals dissolving here. We'll also add our oil. You can use the oil to control the texture of the dough. If this is too chewy, you can add a little more oil. If you want it more chewy, then you back off on the oil. If you're using bread flour, like we talked about earlier, I would leave the oil out altogether.
Okay.
And that will help to make a chewier product.
All personal preference.
It certainly is. There's as many pizzas as there are people.
Okay.
There's my pizza, there's your pizza, and we wanted to help everyone learn the different characteristics of the ingredient so they can make their pizzas.
Sounds like a good idea.
I don't measure the flour, and I believe I mentioned that earlier.
Yes, you did.
I just start scooping it because I'm wanting to get a certain texture of flour, or texture of dough, that is. We're going to add the cold water here. We want to bring the temperature of this dough down so that when it comes out of the mixer, it's under 80 degrees, preferably no more than 75 degrees.
Are you going to check it again?
I will do that.
Temperature?
I will
Okay.
do that. However, I've used chilled water here.
Okay.
So I know that I'm going to be fine with this mixer because it doesn't put a lot of heat in. But I'd be more concerned when I use the food processor, which does put a lot of heat in the dough. Now you notice that I'm using the flat beater here
Okay.
because this really starts to develop the gluten here much better than the dough hook does. So we'll give this just a very good beating at this point.
And this is the same recipe we used earlier.
Yes, it is. But you could make those other adjustments to the sugar, and if you want a little saltier, you could add more salt or less salt as you wish.
Okay.
A little more oil or less as you wish. Now notice how that gluten is already starting to develop and become stringy. It's starting to get some texture. We'll add just a little more here. Until it starts to clean the sides of the bowl. Now we'll turn off the mixer and we'll switch to the dough hook.
Switching to the dough hook at the time it starts to clean off around the sides of the bowl.
Yes,
Okay.
that's getting more to the right texture that we want. The bowl now becomes our kneading surface, just like you were doing here on the countertop.
Okay. This looks easier than what I was doing on the countertop.
It is more efficient, isn't it? It's certainly labor saving. This is our C hook, not the spiral hook. And typically we would put that at speed 2
Okay.
on either this mixer or the one with a spiral hook to knead it.
And how long do you let this go?
It takes only about half as long as what it took you by hand.
Oh, okay.
In fact, often in about 4 minutes or 5 minutes, this will be completely developed.
That's much faster.
You'll notice I'm just adding a little bit of flour at a time just to keep the dough mixing in the bowl.
Just like kneading it on the surface.
If your dough is already near the right consistency when you switch to the dough hook, you have to be careful you don't add too much flour because it'll work it in and you'll come out with too stiff a dough.
Okay.
If your dough is too stiff, when you go to slap it out, then it's not going to want to go. It's going to want to just shrink back. On the other hand, if we don't get enough flour in, the dough will be a little sloppy and it'll just suddenly be much larger than the screen. With this C hook, you'll notice that you get soft dough up at the top and firmer dough down at the bottom. So what I do with that is to just turn the dough over
Okay. Work it
so
around.
that way you work the dough evenly. We'll let this just continue to knead for another couple minutes here, and then we'll check it.
Okay.
It looks like it's getting just about there now.
That didn't take long at all.
Let's check it.
Is this the same dough watch test as before?
The same one. We could maybe start a TV program.
Not dough watch.
There we go. Let's see how we're doing here. We can see just a little
bit
visual
of relax.
relaxation. That's about as much development and flour as we would want. That took us about 4 or 5 minutes, didn't it?
Half the time, I think.
It was much easier on you.
Yes.
Now we're going to do something else here, because I find many times people get their dough too stiff. So this time, let's do some more mixing and make a dough that's too stiff,
Okay.
so our viewers can see what that looks like. It would have been really hard for you to work this much flour in by hand.
Yes.
You can even make a good pizza dough without kneading the dough at all. It's a bit different consistency, more like a pie crust, but it's very tasty. That could save you 12 minutes of effort. You'll notice now that it's not wanting to pick up the flour so much. It's not wanting to hold together so well. Let's see what we've got here.
Separating.
Yes. There's flour in the bowl that's not mixing in. It doesn't have the shine to it. It's harder to work it into a dough ball.
Too much flour.
Too much flour. This is going to be very difficult to stretch out. If you proof it to 3 times in size before you work with it, you'll probably get it to work and you'll have a nice product.
So that's
But it
the way
won't
to-
be as good as when it's done right.
Okay.
Now, take a look at this. It's just not moving at all. It's not relaxing. We don't see that visual relaxation on it. It's not going anywhere. That's too stiff a dough.
Okay.
On the other hand, if it relaxes a lot, then we need to add some more flour to it.
Okay.
Some of our viewers might like to see how the spiral dough hook on the KitchenAid works. We can do it exactly like we did with our other KitchenAid mixer that had the C hook, or we can use the dough hook, the spiral hook entirely. If we do that, we can start with the flour already in. We can take our liquid ingredients. We have here a half cup of warm water in which we've dissolved the yeast, salt, and sugar. This time I have doubled the recipe because this is a large capacity mixer, so one dough ball would tend to get lost in it. I'm turning it to speed 2 here. And we'll just add the liquid alongside the bowl. You'll notice that it starts incorporating the liquid into the flour mixture. I haven't put all the flour in because I want to adjust for the right consistency just as we did before. So now I'm adding a cup and a half of cold water here because remember we want to keep that dough temperature low. We want this to rise very slowly in the refrigerator. Deb, did I mention that this will take at least 2 days before we can make pizza from this?
No.
Do you think we need to order into Papa John's or Domino's or someplace while we're waiting?
No, I'll wait for this, but I would have had more breakfast.
This really does the job, but it's a little slower.
Okay.
With the flat beater, we were able to do our work much quicker, but this gets the job done. And it does move the dough around. We wouldn't have to turn it like we did with the
Okay.
other mixer. So just as we did before, we keep adding a little bit of flour to get our right consistency. We can stop and pinch it, see how wet it feels here, and decide how much more flour we need to add. And finally, we'll take it out and do our dough watch with it. By the way, one recipe will make a 16-inch pizza, or you can have that to make two 12-inch pizzas.
Okay. Is this sifted flour?
I don't bother to sift it.
Okay.
I neither sift nor measure.
I noticed.
That makes it quicker. Many times you'll see recipes say about 3 cups of flour or 3 to 4 cups of flour. That's because it's allowing for the characteristics of the flour and the water. Soft water will absorb more flour than hard water will. Cold water will absorb less flour than warm water. Isn't that working up nice here?
Looks good.
We'll just continue adding flour, checking this and mixing it until we get the consistency that we want, and we'll do our dough test.
Okay.
For our pizza makers who have food processors, I'd like you to see how easy it is to make pizza dough.
Easier than the KitchenAid?
I'll let you be the judge of that.
Okay.
We'll put our water in, put our yeast in. Remember that yeast controls the proofing time. If you want your dough to be ready in 5 or 6 days, you might want to use just a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. If you want it to be ready in 2 days, which is the minimum time, then you want to add the 1/2 teaspoon. Now we're going to just get our yeast dissolved here in the water. Then we'll add our salt and our sugar. And our oil. Now all we have to do is add the flour, Deb.
Okay. And do we need cooler water with the KitchenAid?
I'm
With
glad
the
you mentioned
Cuisinart?
that because we need to add that cold water now. Would you mind fishing out those ice cubes?
Sure.
We'll put in most of our flour here, but not all of it. And we'll add the cold water. This machine puts a lot of friction heat into the dough. So we want to be sure we start with cold water when we make our second addition of water. And we can even chill the flour. Now we're going to just pulse this on and off to mix it, and then we'll just let it mix here and get an idea of the consistency. We can see that's quite a long way from being a dough yet.
Needs a little more flour, it
It
looks like.
certainly does. We don't want to add too much though, because again, this would just work it in and would have too stiff of a dough. Now watch this time how the dough will fling around the side of the container and then it will come back together and rest on top of the blades. When it does that, we stop and check the consistency. Still very sticky. So we'll just keep doing this until we get the right consistency. Again, that's what's important. Machines will take different amounts of time. Mine will take about 60 to 90 seconds to get the dough to do this. Some other machines, you can do this in about 45 seconds.
Okay.
So again, you just have to watch. That dough is a little bit on the warm side. It always leaves it just a little bit sticky. but you'll see it's not very sticky here. We'll do our dough test, just like we did when we were using the KitchenAid mixer, and see how it is. Remember, you want to get that dough ball closed up. You don't want to leave an open space there that would give you a thin center. And
The
there we
watch
have
works
it.
every time.
It sure does. Now that we've made up all these doughs, we're going to store them away in the refrigerator for at least 2 days.
2 days.
We don't want them to dry out either.
Okay, so how do we do that?
There's probably some kind of container you have at home that will work just fine. This happens to be a deep dish rising pizza container,
So just a little oil.
and only a couple drops is all it takes, or you can use some spray and roll the pizza dough around in that.
You want the dough covered.
That's exactly right. Now you'll notice this one fits tightly, but it's not airtight. Would you like to try putting that on there? You work on that one, I'll work on this one. If you have an airtight container, such as this, when the dough rises, it's going to pop it off. So it's a good idea to put some plastic wrap over it before you put the lid off.
Okay.
Put the lid on, that is. It's better to have a straight-sided bowl than one that's sloping, because it helps the dough to rise up better,
Okay.
and you also retain the gases.
Now, what if I want to wait? I have a party coming up in a month. Can I freeze the dough? I don't want to just use 2 days.
A lot of people ask me that question, and the answer is no.
I cannot freeze the dough.
This dough is a very lean dough, and they just don't freeze well.
Okay.
You'd be better off to make some pizza crusts that you par bake, and then just finish them off with toppings and pop them in the hot oven.
Okay.
You can even put this away in a plastic bag. Sometimes if you're short on space, you can make little spaces in the nooks and crannies of the refrigerator that this will fit just fine. The key thing is you want to keep air away from it so it doesn't get crusty.
And in 2 days, it should double in size.
It may or it may not. You want to use the dough when it is doubled in size, but I'll often make several pizza doughs at one time, and on the second day, it may not be much more proof than this, and I'll bring it out for several hours and let it just proof at room temperature until it's double in size and ready to go.
Okay.
That way you can make pizza on day 2, day 4, day 6, 3 different pizza doughs.
Okay.
The owner of the pizza company that I worked for always bragged about his secret sauce. I always thought that was strange because I thought it was the dough that was really so good. And one day he said to me, "Bev, it's not really the sauce, it's the dough." Of course, the dough recipe is very simple. That's easy to duplicate. A secret sauce is much harder to make. But we're going to do that today. We're going to make our own secret sauce. But look at all the choices that you have. You have large cans, small cans. You have ragu here that can be used for spaghetti sauce or pizza sauce that we could use. Already prepared pizza sauce, crushed tomatoes. You have tomato paste. You have diced. You have puree. So how do you decide what to pick?
Are we going to use all of this in our sauce?
I think we'll just pick out a couple here.
Okay.
But I did want to tell you about a couple in particular. One year with the pizza company, we ran out of sauce before the canning season started in August. We were scrambling to find anything we could, and I particularly remember one sauce. It was packed in a number 10 can, just like this. The only thing that was done to it was a fresh basil leaf was put in and the hot crushed tomatoes poured over it. It was a wonderful sauce. I had some franchisees call me up and said, "Can we switch to this sauce instead of our own sauce?" Some people want to find an orange sauce. Start with canned tomato soup. It already has a lot of spices in. Add a little bit of oregano to it, and you have a very nice, mild orange sauce. But now we're going to pick out a couple that we want to use for our own sauce.
Okay.
We're going to make it a little more complex. It doesn't have to be complex, but we will make this one from some crushed tomatoes and some tomato paste here. So you'll have a chance to see the right consistency and how we go about adding the spices to the sauce to get our own secret sauce.
Okay.
For the sauce, we're going to start with a very basic crushed tomato. It has just tomato, some puree, it has a little salt and citric acid. The citric acid brings down the pH, so it's safe for canning. That's a little bit thin.
Pizza sauce is a little thicker.
It certainly is. So we're going to take some paste and add to that.
Are there any seasonings in the paste or the sauce?
There's only some salt in the tomatoes and there's no salt in the paste.
Okay.
We'll mix this up with a whisk. That would be fine just like that. You can see it starting to mound up here. That'd be easy to spread. Or if you like a thicker sauce, and that's just a matter of individual taste, you can make it a little thicker.
Okay. Could you add a can of tomato paste that's got Italian herbs?
You certainly could, and that would be a shortcut.
Okay.
You can buy already seasoned sauce, and many times you'll just find you need to add a little pepper to it or a little more seasoning, and it'll be right to your taste.
Just taste it before you put it on the pizza.
That's right. This makes about 4½ cups of sauce, but what we're going to do to develop our own secret sauce is to pour off a cup of this, heat it up, because we want the spices to come out in the sauce, and they won't do that if the sauce is cold. So we'll get this very hot, then we'll start adding our spices.
Okay.
Deb, our viewers can follow along as you make your own secret sauce here.
Good.
You'll remember the tomatoes had some salt in already, so we're going to start off with just a 1/4 teaspoon of the salt and give that a taste.
Okay. And again, we're using the sea salt.
Yes, and of course you could use just regular table salt.
Okay. That's good.
I like it that way too. You'll notice there's a little acidity in the tomatoes, and we can sweeten that with some sugar, which I prefer. Some people would like to use soda, some baking soda,
Soda.
and some people will even use a little olive oil to take away that acidity.
Will
But
there
we're-
be any other spices we add that would give it some sweetness?
The basil could also give it a little bit of sweetness.
Okay.
And if it's not quite sweet enough, sometimes I wait until I've added the basil to see if that will bring up the sweetness.
Okay.
I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of sugar here, and let's see how that works. We still want a little bit of twang from the tomatoes. We don't
Okay.
want it to be sweet and sugary, but we don't want to have it be too strong.
Maybe a little more?
Let's go for another 1/4 teaspoon here. Remember, we're using just 1 cup of the sauce mixture that we made up from the crushed tomatoes and the paste. So for every cup of sauce you have, you would want to add the amount of ingredient that we come up with here.
That's better.
That's better, isn't it? Black pepper, there's different choices. We could use mixed peppers, we could use a fine ground pepper, or we could use a cracked pepper that will take a little more time to come out. In fact, all of these spices will bloom over the next day, and our sauce will be wonderful tasting tomorrow.
Okay.
But since we want the flavor to come out as much as possible right now, let's use some of the ground pepper. If I remember right, You don't like your food real spicy?
No, a little more on the mild side.
Some people tell me they use 3 times as much pepper as I've got here in the recipe. And then I've had other people say to me that they cut everything in half that's here and it was just right. So you see what an individual thing sauce is.
It's all personal.
You can have a fairly spicy sauce, and because your dough is plain and your cheese is plain, it will go together well. If it's missing something, always try a little more black pepper. What do you think?
That's good.
Okay, you like yours mild. I'd probably use about 3 times that much.
Do you ever add anything else to the dough as far as spices?
Once in a while, I add whey powder, which makes it crisper, and sometimes I'll add some garlic to it.
Okay.
But outside of that, I like the dough plain. I've tried adding basil, oregano, pepper, other things, but then it seems that there isn't the contrast between the dough, the sauce, and cheese.
So we just want to add the spices to the sauce.
So we're getting written down here what your secret sauce recipe is.
So far we've got a 1/4 teaspoon of salt.
And 3/4 teaspoon of sugar, and we added a 1/2 teaspoon of the black pepper right now. The black pepper you get at the front of your mouth. To balance that, we can put a little bit of red pepper in, which you feel at the back of your mouth.
This is like cayenne.
Yes. That definitely packed a wallop to it. For the garlic, we could use some fresh garlic, or today we're going to just use some garlic powder. Garlic can quickly overwhelm a delicate tomato sauce. So we're going to start here with just a 1/16 of a teaspoon of the garlic powder. A lot of people think because it's Italian food, you should use lots and lots of garlic. But that just isn't so.
Can you use some fresh garlic as well?
Yes, the fresh garlic is very nice. Like we've got one right back here. If we put a clove of that in, that would be very nice instead of the dry.
Okay.
I can definitely taste that with just the 1/16 teaspoon.
That's good.
I'm going to give you a 1/2 teaspoon of the basil, just because that happens to be my favorite spice.
Okay.
And we're going to use the crushed leaves, rub it between our fingers or hands a little bit.
Brings
so
out the
oils
flavor.
will start to come out.
It's starting to look like pizza sauce. And tastes like it too.
Many times I'll add a lot more basil than that to it. Fresh basil, of course, would be good. Use about 3 times the amount of fresh basil as you do the dried. That's nice. How do you like that?
That'll be good on top of a pizza.
Everyone thinks of oregano as being the pizza seasoning spice, but I find it very strong. Do you know what the flavor of oregano is?
Is it medicinal?
It definitely is. I don't know, maybe you could use it for a cough.
If I had one.
Some people like a lot of oregano. I don't happen to be one who does. However, I found that the Italian oregano or the Turkish oregano has a milder flavor. And so I tend to use more of it than I used to.
Can you get that anywhere?
Penzeys is a good source for the Turkish oregano.
Okay.
definite flavor change.
Yes, it is.
I once was packing tomato sauce beside someone who used oregano almost entirely for their pizza sauce seasoning, and it was very, very strong. I didn't happen to care for it, but they had a very large following. And last, we're down to the secret spice ingredient, and that's fennel seed. Either whole, cracked, or ground. I prefer mine either whole or cracked. And it doesn't take very much, but it gives a wonderful flavor to the pizza sauce.
Is that the licorice flavored spice?
That is indeed. See what that does for your taste buds.
Okay.
You could also use a little bit of fresh fennel in it also.
That's really good.
So Deb, you've developed your own secret sauce.
This is my own.
When you think of pizza cheese, what comes to mind?
The long strings that hang off the end of your chin.
That's right, and burn. That's the mozzarella. That's what our country grew up with
Sure.
with pizza. And of course, you can get it in the block and grate your own, or there's so many cheeses now that you can get pre-grated. For example, I like to use some Monterey Jack in a blend with mozzarella. This would be a favorite in California. If you were on the East Coast, you might see cheddar being used in the blend.
White cheddar.
White cheddar, and of course you could use yellow also. You'll also see a lot of provolone cheese used. One of my favorites is Munster or Munster, or also known as brick cheese. That will really cut the string and add a lot of flavor. And then of course there's the cheeses that you put over the top, which you could also put in your cheese blend. We all think of Parmesan as the pizza cheese that you sprinkle on top, but you could use Romano, you could use Asiago, which is one of my favorite ones to grate on the pizza when it comes out of the oven.
How about my friends that are lactose intolerant?
They and your vegan friends might enjoy Follow Your Heart mozzarella cheese.
No dairy.
No dairy. We've got some cheese options here to get it into small particles, Deb. We can take a grater the old-fashioned way and grate it, then mix it with whatever we want to.
Okay.
Or if you have a food processor, we can just put in some chunks of mozzarella. And here we're going to use some Munster cheese.
Okay.
Pulse it a few times. And you can see that cheese is starting to break up into smaller pieces.
Does the age of the cheese matter, Bev?
Yes, it does. The more aged the cheese and the smaller the particle of the cheese, the more it will melt.
Okay.
So if you have a very aged cheese, you can end up with a lot of grease on your pizza. So it's a good idea if you've got a well-aged cheese to make sure that's cut into larger chunks.
Okay.
It may look like you're covering your pizza better when you have finely grated cheese, but it's going to melt down.
Okay. And what if I don't have a Cuisinart? Or I don't want to take the time to grate?
Then go for one of the pre-packaged cheeses. This one here has part skim mozzarella in it, provolone, and Munster. You've got one here. What do you have in yours?
Kraft Italian 5 cheese has natural shredded cheese, mozzarella, provolone, Romano, Asiago, and Parmesan.
So we've just taken a shortcut.
Okay.
At last, 2 days has passed, and we're ready to make our pizza dough into a real New York style pizza, Deb.
Our oven's preheated to 550.
And
with the
we're
stone.
hungry. Our crew out here is hungry too. So our dough has doubled to size. You'll notice that if you look real close, that there's some tiny dark colored spots on here. The high gluten flour has some of the bran in, because remember we said we have more of the whole wheat berry ground into this flour, and that will tend to color a little bit, just like when you cut an apple, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
Now what we're going to do here first is just to make a palm print in the center of the pizza. Now this is going to be a dough bank that as we stretch the pizza out, this will stretch thinner, but we don't want the center to be too thin.
Okay.
Because if the center gets too thin, it won't bake through. The sauce, the cheese, and the toppings will press it down, and no matter how long you bake it, it will always seem like it's doughy.
Okay. Are you just using regular flour to pat this out?
I'm using some rice flour here. Some of the high gluten flour, which is slightly granular, or the rice flour, will make an extra crispy crust.
Okay.
Now from this palm print then we're going to just work out to the edge, not clear over the edge though, just to the edge.
So you don't use a rolling pin?
And we don't use the rolling pin. If you wanted a more crispy, crackery crust, you would use the rolling pin.
Okay.
But we want more of a bready, open, airy pizza. You notice I'm getting a few little bubbles here at the edge. We can just pop those.
And you're not going clear to the edge.
I'm leaving about a 1/2 inch unworked here. If you like a lot of bone, which is sometimes called on your pizza, you can leave about 3/4 inch.
Okay.
But now what I like to do is just stretch this area, lifting the dough about 6 inches off the table on the edge that's away from me, and stretch this dough between my thumbs and forefingers. And that will keep it from getting too fluffy at the edge, since I really want a lot of the dough under the sauced and cheesed area. Okay,
Okay.
so now we're going to slap the dough. Some people think that this should be flying through the air here as you're doing it, but that's not really what's happening.
That's just for show.
You're simply transferring this dough from one arm to the other here. Never does it fly through the air in this case. Now
Okay.
when we do the twirl, then we'll get some up in the air motion here. But what I'm doing is putting my fingers right at the edge there and putting my other hand so it's about 1/4 of the way around the dough and stretching it 1/4 at a time. And I'm just laying this pizza up my arm.
It's stretching as you do that.
That's stretching as I do it. Now I can also stretch it a little bit like this. And of course, I can twirl it too. Now if you want to do that, and like you said, it's just for show because it tends to thin out the center of the pizza, but you'll probably be expected to do this. So what we're going to do when we toss the pizza is we're going to do a wind up and toss the dough in the air. We're going to wind up our arms and then we're going to unwind into the air. So imagine putting one hand about 10 o'clock and one hand about 4 o'clock. And that's all there is to it. We get a wind up here and there we go.
And I'm sure you've done that perfect every time.
To tell you the truth, the first time I did it, I threw it up in the air, hit the ceiling, and it fell down and draped over my head. Now you see, we're not quite stretched out enough here, so I'm going to pick it up. Just do a little more stretching here. If I happen to get it overstretched a little too much, if I just drop it a few inches, that will shrink right up. But I don't want to get the dough over the edge. If I get it caught in under here, it can get caught in this wire mesh
And
of the
burn.
screen, and you'll have a hard time getting it off.
Okay.
Ready for the sauce
Ready
now.
for the sauce.
How would you like to try the sauce?
All right. This is my secret sauce, right?
Yes, it is.
All right.
It takes about a cup of sauce for a 16-inch pizza. Find a spoon that's comfortable to use, that you can move the pizza sauce around on the dough and get it as even as possible.
How far am I going to the edge?
Well, you do that like a pro. A 1/2 or 3/4 is fine. Some people like a lot of sauce on their pizza, and some don't like much at all. In fact, some people make a white pizza that has only cheese, no sauce at all.
Oh, this smells wonderful. But it is my secret sauce.
That's probably why. Meanwhile, I've got the cheese ready, and I'm using the prepackaged cheese blend, to which I also added a little bit of white cheddar. That's looking beautiful, Deb.
Just a little bit more. I like sauce on my pizza. Okay.
Now we'll add the cheese. We don't have to watch the bottom line tonight, so we can use as much cheese here as we want.
What does the pizzeria usually put on?
Typically about 8 ounces, maybe 8 to 12 ounces. I like to use about 12 ounces as a minimum, and sometimes even a pound of cheese.
Okay. And our cheese blend again was mozzarella, Romano, provolone.
I believe that's right.
Okay.
And then I added a little bit of cheddar to it.
Okay.
Now we can clean the edge by just lifting it up here so the cheese falls back on to the sauce area and doesn't burn.
Okay.
We want to be careful that we don't get too much cheese or toppings here in the center, because that would weight that down and cause it to be doughy and droopy in the middle.
And a true New York style pizza is just cheese, is that correct?
This is it.
Okay.
This is it. But we're going to make the American version here.
Okay.
And we'll add some pepperoni. I recommend that you taste test different things that you have available in your market. You might find you like one cheese that has a milkier flavor than another, one tomato better than another. You might prefer a different pepperoni. A national brand that is available in most places is Hormel, which is very good. It's a good idea to pull some of your toppings out to the edge, because remember, the pizza is somewhat concave, so the toppings will tend to slide toward the center already.
Okay.
And if I make it this way, we'll be able to see that that is the way it happens. Remember, you don't have to have a pizza screen. It makes a nice target. It's easy to handle in and out of the oven, but you can put some rice flour or your high gluten flour or some cornmeal or semolina on your pizza peel and just form the dough right on the peel. You want to work very quickly, shake it a little bit to make sure that it doesn't stick.
Okay.
And now we're ready to put our pizza in the oven. This oven will preheat to 550 degrees. Many ovens will preheat only to 500, but that's fine. Where I have such a hot oven as this, I may not be able to put the pizza stone on the bottom rack. I have had to move this up one rack or it would get too done on the bottom. My pizza stone is heated for about 45 minutes. We'll check it in about 3 or 4 minutes to see if it has some bubbles that need popping or if it needs to be turned. We've got a few bubbles here, and I'm going to reach in with a long-handled fork and just pop those. Now, if I don't bring the cheese and toppings back over it, I'll have a dry spot that will tend to burn. So I'll not only pop the bubble, but I'll pull the cheese and toppings back. Okay. Ovens usually don't heat evenly, so about 2/3 of the way through the baking, we're going to just give the pizza about a quarter of a turn. All right, our pizza's ready. And I think we have some hungry takers for it too. I sprinkled a little Asiago cheese over the top there, Deb.
That looks wonderful, Bev.
Now choosing our pizza cutter is our next task here. This is my favorite one. It's a big wheel, it's sturdy, and I can put my thumb here. I can just go whack into this pizza, and it just cuts crisply right across.
Sounds good and crisp.
Now this is a different kind of one, pizza cutter. Also works very well. It's compact, but I'd stay away from one like this because it has only a very small thumb guard. It would be easy to slip off and cut your finger. It doesn't have the weight. It's just not as easy to use.
Okay.
If you don't have a surface on which you can cut your pizza, you can also use the scissors.
Okay.
And in just a moment here, we'll have this all cut and we'll be ready for some tasting.
Sounds good.
The crust is golden brown, top and bottom. It supports the crust supports the cheese and toppings. We've got a success.
Wonderful. Can we taste?
Let's do.
Okay.
I was ready for this. Delicious.
Chewy on the inside, crisp on the outside. Perfect.
We could even put some garlic butter over the edge of the crust here, or we could dip the crust in some pizza sauce if we wanted to.
It's good the way it is.
I agree. Now that our pizza makers have mastered the techniques of making New York style pizza, it's time to have a pizza party.
Let's put some toppings on.
All right, let's look how we prepare these toppings. Green pepper, cut off the top. Slice it into about 1/8 inch shreds. About 1 to 1.5 inches long. And lots of different colored peppers make a beautiful topping.
Yeah.
For the onions, cut your onion in half, then in quarters. And then into shreds, about 1/8 inch.
Well, that looks good. What else do we have to top our pizza, Bev?
Have you ever heard of a Hawaiian pizza, Deb?
Oh, yes.
We take a little bit of pineapple and ham or Canadian bacon for that.
Tidbits work the best for that?
Yes, the small pieces are best.
Okay.
And of course, we all love pepperoni. The fresh mushrooms, or you can use canned mushrooms too, are good. If you use the fresh mushrooms, cut them about 1/4 inch wide because the heat tends to get to those.
Okay.
And anything that would tend to desiccate in heat, put that on first. So like our mushrooms, our pepperoni, the ham, these things that would dry out in the oven would go on first. And then the items that need more heat, such as the peppers and onions, raw sausage, would go on last.
Okay.
This is some Italian sausage that's, some of it's hot, some of it's mild. And to put on the Italian sausage, we just take little bits and pull off and put on the pizza. Now you can pre-cook these if you want, or you can, if you keep them very small, you can just portion little bits and put on top your pizza the very last thing.
What about ground beef? Is that a good thing to put on pizza?
A lot of people like ground beef. That's another option too.
Okay.
If you're using bacon, I'd recommend that you cook the bacon some first. Cook it until it's willowy. I like to just cut it into 1-inch squares, put it in a skillet, stir fry it until it's partially cooked. Salami would be another topping that would be good. Black olives, sliced green olives. Everything should have a definition to it. So when you look, you see it's a mushroom, you see it's a piece of pepperoni, you see it's a green pepper, rather than finely diced. For doing the pizza, then, for our pizza party, we could start with a large pizza. We could mark it off into segments here. Of course, some of it's for kids. They probably aren't going to want these green peppers here, are they? But adults might not mind that. And then the adults can make their own pizzas in their area of the larger pizza, putting the items on that need to be sheltered from the heat first.
What about a seafood pizza? Would you put shrimp on pizza?
Shrimp is very good. Little pieces of raw shrimp, and that's nice with a green onion
Okay.
and a little bit of red pepper on that. So a little green pepper, a few shreds of onions here. A lot of people, when they first start making pizzas, tend to make a kitchen sink pizza, putting everything on it. But after you've done that a while, many people tell me that they've cut back so they use fewer and fewer items on. And I find I often like just a plain cheese pizza.
Okay.
For a kid's party, you can do it this way, or you can get individual pizza screens and each one can make their own pizza. You might want to have small rolling pins or something like this small roller here to roll out the dough. That would be easier for the children to do it.
That sounds good.
We've got our last pizza topped, Deb, and ready to go into the oven.
It looks great, Bev.
I want to thank our camera crew and everyone who helped us do this today, and also to all of you who watched, and especially, Deb, to you for all of your help and assistance
Thank
today.
you, Bev. It was very informative.
We hope you all enjoy great pizza making.